Today we're taking a look at some NHL trade rumors and the futures of a few NHL prominent players, including Sam Reinhart of the Buffalo Sabres, Phil Kessel of the Arizona Coyotes, Seth Jones of the Columbus Blue Jackets. We also have an update on Frederik Andersen and the Toronto Maple Leafs and a little more details on the Jack Eichel situation. We'll jump into the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of things to discuss here today. First up, I want to talk about the Maple Leafs and getting a surprise return here. We got Frederik Andersen is going to be making his NHL return in their game against the Ottawa Senators here tomorrow night. So he's going to be able to squeeze in one game before the end of the regular season. Of course, he hasn't played in the NHL in about 2 months' time. He has just completed a conditioning stint in the American Hockey League, and that did not go overly well. He played parts of a game, and then I think it was 1 or 2 complete games, and really the results were poor at best. He was not himself. He was certainly quite rusty, but at the same time, after not being playing for 2 months, you got to cut him a little bit of slack, I think, to say that he wasn't going to be razor sharp after an extended time being off. But however, it gives them a chance to see what they got in Frederik Andersen before the Stanley Cup playoffs begin. Now, at this point, it's looking pretty likely that the Leafs are going to be doing battle with the Habs. That's not a guarantee. Those positions are not locked in stone. Depending on how the struggling Winnipeg Jets do in Montreal in their final game or so here, the Jets and the Habs could actually swap places. And it could be Toronto versus Winnipeg. But either way, one thing that's guaranteed here, the Maple Leafs opponent in the first round could have really solid goaltending. They could either be facing Connor Hellebuyck of the Winnipeg Jets or possibly Carey Price of the Montreal Canadiens. Price is expected to return for the playoffs for Montreal. And even though he hasn't had the most stellar season, he's still Carey Price. He's shown it in the past. And if he plays like the way he did the year he won all that hardware back 3 or 4 years ago, that's certainly a possibility that it could give the Leafs a hard time. He's capable of stealing games, and so is Connor Hellebuyck. So clearly the Leafs have been an offensive juggernaut all season. They're likely going to win the North Division through the playoffs would be my prediction, most likely, but you just never know. Anything can happen in the playoffs, and if they run into a hot goalie, they could have some issues. So they need to be equal in goal. And at this point, I would say, if they do battle in Montreal, the way Carey Price and Jake Allen have played, you throw in Frederik Andersen, Jack Campbell, on the Leafs side, even David Frederik, it's probably pretty even. But if one of their goalies on Montreal side gets real hot, like Price, it could be a difference maker. So they need to get good goaltending there. It's certainly important. And obviously, when it comes to the Leafs, though, you would think, regardless of how Frederik Andersen plays in that last game against the Senators, that game 1 has to go to Jack Campbell, right? Like, you would think that he has to get the start, and that only if he falters and doesn't look good that Andersen would go in. You would think, but I guess we'll see what Sheldon Keefe and the Leafs are going to do here. It could very well be Andersen's last appearance as a Maple Leaf. You got to keep in mind he's a pending unrestricted free agent, and if Campbell works the load in the playoffs and doesn't end up, faltering, it could be Campbell the rest of the way, and Frederik Andersen might not really see much more playing time. It's really hard to say, but it would be interesting to see how this goes as he makes his return here. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to look at some other players that could find himself on a move this offseason. Well, let's start here with the Sabres, and a quick update on Jack Eichel, and we're going to talk about Sam Reinhart here as well. Of course, yesterday's video was dedicated to Eichel and the fact that it sounds like he wants out, all the injury issues and everything that he's been going through. The latest 31 Thoughts column from Elliot Friedman came out today, and we get a little bit more details on the exact surgery and everything to do with his neck injury that he's been dealing with here. So essentially what Jack Eichel wants to have done is there's a newer type of surgery, which is kind of what they call like a disc replacement surgery. So they would kind of remove the herniated disc, and they have like a fake one basically that they put in its place. Now, there hasn't been done in a hockey player, so they can kind of compare the recovery and the longer term outcomes, but it has been done in some MMA fighters and other professional athletes, and so far the results look pretty promising and good, at least on a short-term basis. So I guess to some medical professionals, it makes sense that they might be opposed to something they would consider risky. Obviously, players are under contract to teams. They're considered an asset, and they don't want anything bad to happen, and they wouldn't want to see him have a surgery that would have a negative impact and make things worse and then cause him not to be able to play even longer or even jeopardize his career. So that's kind of where things are at, but you would think with Eichel making as much money as he has, that he's going to be consulting the absolute top surgeons in the U.S., that something like that wouldn't be recommended, like if it was really all that risky. So I would think that because of that, the Sabres would be more accommodating, knowing that he's in good hands, talking to top doctors. Apparently they agreed to have like a month-long pause and not do the surgery, see how he's reacting to just having rest, and that's pretty much almost up now, which is why it kind of goes along the lines of what we're seeing him kind of speak out in his media availability, saying that there's a disconnect, and apparently he still wants the surgery, and they still seem to be against it. So we'll have to see how this plays out. But he also went on to talk about some other injuries like we talked about, that kind of drug on from last year, that are still not healed after having an extended time off. I mean, the Sabres were not one of the teams that made it to the return to play bubble last summer. So he had an extended break, and to have injuries that were not healed up, that really makes you question how things are being done there in Buffalo. So we'll see. But like I said before yesterday, like it's an ugly mess that seems to be resulting in divorce. And he may not be the only player. So we're going to also talk about Sam Reinhart. Now, listening to Sam Reinhart's comments, we didn't really get into Reinhart or Ristolainen or any of the other Sabres players yesterday, but it looks like the Sabres might be in a situation where they might have to make multiple trades here. Reinhart sounding like he'd be very interested in moving on as well. He didn't really come out with a lot of the forthcoming comments, but you could certainly get the feel for the fact that, at his age, everyone's at that the losing is taking its toll on him, the whole culture, not getting any chance at playoffs, just going through all of this and dealing with everything they've gone through, that he certainly gave the vibe that he's open to moving on here as well, which creates a real issue for the Sabres. I mean, he was a team MVP this year. He scored 25 goals. He's been a real solid, productive player, continuing to get better. The whole 6 years he's been a part of the organization, a very high draft pick. The Sabres are, a decade removed from making the playoffs. They had several high picks, including Reinhart, including Eichel, including Rasmus Dahlin, and they're no further ahead. Like now they're taking a step back where they might have to tear it down and rebuild without ever getting to the point that they even get to be a playoff contender again, which after a decade is terrible and really reflects really poorly on the owners there. We've kind of talked about that before, but Reinhart's another guy who's a pending restricted free agent, 1 year away from being an unrestricted free agent. When he was asked about his future, he kind of said it kind of would sort itself out. Didn't sound like he was overly enthusiastic on returning. Now, Sam Reinhart would probably fetch a pretty good return for the Sabres. He got a chance to play more center ice, his natural position this year, and he really thrived, did very well. Like I say, he can be a goal-scoring center with a right shot. Like it's a unique skill set that's not super common around the NHL, and I think a lot of NHL teams would love to have him. He was brought up in the 31 Thoughts column today by Elliot Friedman as well, and it was mentioned that several Western Canadian teams would love to have a chance to get Sam Reinhart on their roster. Of course, he's a BC boy. So, between the Canucks, Flames, and Oilers, at least a few of those teams would be very interested in making an acquisition. I think he'd be a good fit on any of those teams. Obviously, probably Calgary and Vancouver being more likely than Edmonton. With Edmonton having McDavid and Draisaitl, with the potential, free agency that they're dealing with here with Nugent Hopkins, Tyson Barrie. I would think getting a guy like Reinhart, as much as it might be intriguing and interesting, I don't know. I think a team like Calgary, who's expected to go through more transition, could be a possibility for Reinhart. And even in Vancouver's case, you could certainly see a scenario there where that might be able to work, but a lot of it's going to depend on money. And we know that the Canucks have other things that they're dealing with right now, including head coach Travis Green, which seems to be a bit of a head scratcher why that's not done yet. And they ran into a lot of issues last offseason with free agency and taking their good old time to sign players and losing guys, because they had to get deals done elsewhere because they couldn't wait around forever. So I don't know where Reinhart will end up if he'll indeed get traded. The Sabres are not in a situation with Eichel or Reinhart where they absolutely have to. They do have some control here, and Kevin Adams can choose not to be kind of bullied into making these deals. But at the same time, they have to do what's best for the organization, and it might be best just to get these guys moved on if that's really what they want, and kind of recoup what you can, do the best you can, and start fresh and see where things can go. But it's certainly messy in Buffalo, and it could be an offseason that gets even messier before things start to get any better. Now, Elliot Friedman also goes on to talk a bit about the Arizona Coyotes in his column today in the 31 Thoughts, talking about the fact that he expects a guy like Phil Kessel to be likely traded this offseason as well. With the departure of head coach Rick Tocchet, obviously he and Kessel were quite close. Of course, they worked together in Pittsburgh as well. And I know one of the reasons Kessel was comfortable going to the Coyotes after kind of having some issues in Pittsburgh was he was going to work for Rick Tocchet, who he had a lot of respect for and got along with very well. You can say what you want about Rick Tocchet as a coach. He certainly has some good qualities. And one of the things he does well with is dealing with players who are not easy to deal with. Seems to have a special way with some players that just have a hard time connecting with other coaches. He just something that he seems to have an knack for, and he has a bond with Kessel. So not to say that Kessel's going to end up wherever Tocchet ends up, because we don't know where he's going here yet. But clearly, his time in Arizona could be coming to an end. His contract doesn't have a lot of time left on it. Clearly, we know GM Bill Armstrong is in a situation where he's likely going to be looking to trade out some vets and move around some more players here to kind of shake things up and leave his mark on this team. He's had control at the helm here long enough, and he's seen what this team is capable of, and obviously it needs to be a lot better. So I wouldn't be completely shocked if they re-explore captain Oliver Ekman-Larsson deals this coming offseason, and even a guy like Kessel and some of the other guys around. There apparently were some rumors as well that a guy like Nick Schmaltz, who had signed a longer-term deal with GM John Chayka when he was in Arizona, that they could consider doing a buyout, because he's still young enough. Until you hit age 27, you only get 1/3 of the contract buyout instead of 2/3, so it's a lot cheaper. But according to Friedman, there have been some rumblings about that, but not something that he expects to happen. But Kessel, on the other hand, at this point, hasn't really been able to really find his offensive game in Arizona, like happens to pretty much everybody. We've seen it happen to Taylor Hall and others. And I think it's time for him to kind of wrap up his career, likely going back to a similar situation if he can, with a team similar to where he was at in Pittsburgh, where he can be more of a complementary piece and certainly help a team that's already got some other veteran guys around that can lead, and he can just be that secondary scoring piece to help get them over the top and have a shot at a championship. I think he's a great player in the right situation, but he's just not the guy, just like we saw Hall and others. And we'll see if he gets moved on to yet another team here in the offseason. Another big name to watch this offseason as well is Columbus Blue Jackets top defenseman Seth Jones. Now, of course, we've seen that they were parting ways from head coach John Tortorella, so we know there's going to be a new bench boss in town. That should be a welcome news for a guy like Patrick Laine, Max Domi, Jack Roslovic, all the newer, younger players that were brought in. Likely will be sticking around to get a new shot here to see if they can make it work with the team with a new head coach. I know Patrick Laine's end of season media availability sounded fairly promising, that the young Finnish star wants to get back to playing well and certainly wants to stick around in Columbus to give it more of an opportunity, more of a chance. So I don't think he necessarily wants out, but a guy like Jones is probably going to have to be their absolute top priority. If I'm GM Jarmo Kekalainen, after everything this team has been through, they've been a team that's been barely qualifying. Yes, they went on a little bit of a run a couple years ago. They won their first series, but really, for quite a long time now, they've been squeaking in those final spots of the playoffs. They've never really truly been a Stanley Cup contender. We've seen a decent amount of turnover now and over the past year. Obviously, Panarin and Bobrovsky left town by free agency a while back. Now this year we've seen a guy like Captain Nick Foligno be traded. Not to say that he couldn't re-sign, that's a possibility. But we've seen more turnover in that roster, and it's a time now where they have to look at it and say, you know what? The future of this team really is largely dependent on whether or not defenseman Seth Jones will commit and re-up here. He's entering the final year of his contract. And if he's not interested in extending and sticking around, which Columbus has had a lot of issues with, then they might need to go in a different direction here and consider a full rebuild as well. I know that there are people out there been advocating for the Jackets to go through more of a full rebuild. They don't have an overly deep prospect pool. It's really going to be difficult, I think, for them to be anything more than mediocre in the short term. So, step one, get a new coach. Step two, sign Seth Jones if you can. If you can't sign Seth Jones long term, or you think you're going to run into issues like you have with Panarin and Bobrovsky and others about committing to that team in that city longer term, that's going to really change the direction, in my opinion, of the franchise. And we very well could end up seeing a Seth Jones trade if Kekalainen can't get him extended. At least that's how I would handle things. And there is some talk in the 31 Thoughts column about the fact that needs to be their top priority. He's not suggesting there's going to be a trade, but clearly mentioning that the team could go down that road if a contract extension is looking like it's going to be impossible or very difficult to do, because they don't want to go into this final season here really and not know what the future holds for their top player on the back end. I mean, he and Werenski have been like the main cornerstones back there that they can continue to build around if he's going to sign long term and be a part of the solution. If he doesn't want to do that, then that's going to really impact things, and they're going to have to change things up here, and you might as well trade him while he still has a contract. Get what you can instead of losing him in free agency like you did with Bob and Panarin, and it really hurt the team overall. So there could be some more big trades coming out of Columbus if they can't extend Jones on the blue line. So let me know your thoughts on the futures of these players down below in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news from around the entire NHL. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.